All right, and we are live. What is going on, my specialist SPC here, and welcome back to episode 3 of the Talkalorian Live. You see, I've got my co-host Andy King with me on this one, and we've also got a special guest today joining us, coming back to the channel once again, Mr. Sean Chandler.
Hello. Thanks for having me. It's exciting to talk Star Wars.
Yeah,
Especially
man.
getting to talk Star Wars with Andy.
Hey, howdy. Happy to be here.
All right, guys. Well, chapter 11, the Heiress. I mean, man, what? All I can say, man, is wow, this was like a mind-blowing episode, at least for me as a Star Wars fan, was just insane, especially, everything that's happened with the Clone Wars
Yep.
show ending earlier this year. I mean, this was a very nostalgic episode for all them great fans of the Clone Wars.
Well, and I mean, you and Ren have been so excited to see Bo-Katan that this was just beautiful to see this finally come together.
It's crazy too how like the voice actress is actually now playing the actual role.
Yeah. And that's why I'm excited to see Rosario Dawson, if we are sure that Ahsoka is going to come up. I mean, actually seeing her as well as actually, like you said, live action. That's just a nice treat for the fans, and I think she killed it. I personally like the air she gave, just how I want to say malicious, how malicious she came off. Just it was beautiful. It was
that's for sure. So, Sean, what did you think about this episode?
Yeah, I thoroughly enjoyed it, and it kind of gave me what I needed for this season. They started off with kind of some of these standalone stories that had elements that were enjoyable, but it didn't necessarily give you an exact flavor for what this season was going to be, what was going to be the specific things that were going to happen. And so episode 3 did that. And while it, in a lot of ways, was still kind of its own little side quest, it lets you know kind of these pieces of the puzzle and what the grander picture might be for where this season is headed, what the payoff might be, all of that fun stuff. And then, as you guys alluded to, just when you have a situation where 8 years ago they cast Starbuck to voice a character on the Clone Wars, you don't actually think that there's going to be that day when it's going to turn into a live action deal. That's not what anybody was thinking. It was like, oh, cool. Cool. Sadie Sackloff is voicing a character. Cool. And then here we are 8 years later, and then it's actually her right there. And that's cool. It's cool when things like that are able to happen. And so just in general, some solid action, moved the story forward, and kind of gave me what I needed for the season to feel like it's kicking into high gear.
Yeah, I definitely feel like, I guess I don't know what your thoughts were on last week's episode, but I definitely feel like this was definitely a step up compared to last week's, with it just kind of being something a little minor, like you just said, its own little side story instead of the grand picture of the actual, what the show is going to be about.
Right. And I think that's I was very frustrated by last week's episode. It's not that the individual moments were bad, but it just felt so much like, let's have some random conflict between A and B.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's just like, it's all like the end or the beginning, end of last season, actually. The end of last season, hey, we need you to go and find other Mandalorians. So he does that in episode 1, but it's like a bit of a misdirect. And so then it's like another people like, well, try over here. And the whole episode is just what happened between A and B. Mm-hmm. And what happened was a bunch of random stuff. And my wife didn't watch it with us when we initially watched it. We wake up early on Fridays to watch it with my kids, and wife doesn't like to wake up early, so she doesn't do that. So she missed last week's episode. And so when it came to watching this week's, I almost told her, like, you can just skip last week's. All you need to know is the ship is damaged and there's fish people. But, like, there's just nothing of consequence, really. And in my comment section, some people tried to argue that point with me. And they, they're like, no, I mean, it really was consequential because you learn that Baby Yoda is hungry. And you learned that there were consequences from the prison deals. Like, those are just references. It's like, oh, a living creature likes to eat. Oh my goodness. wow, that creature that we saw eating frogs before, it likes to eat. Oh my goodness, wow. I mean, like, that's what's frustrating about it is that it just didn't feel like I learned anything that important. It doesn't feel like we met an ally that's going to be one of the big players of the season, and then it didn't progress the story. It was literally just what happened while they were flying across the universe.
Yeah, I definitely feel like last week's episode really didn't even need to really happen. Like, I would have been more satisfied if this would have been, the second episode instead of there being just this random out of nowhere, just nothing really exciting except for the big chase with all the spiders and all that.
Right. Yeah, I think that's what's frustrating me is that it was. You're talking about, like, you only have 8 episodes in a season, so one of those, it's over 10% of your season, like 15% of your season is dedicated to Taxi Trip, and that doesn't add any, like, so it immediately stands out, and then but beyond that, it also meant that we were to the 3rd episode before they gave us any sort of like taste, flavor for where things were headed, and that just seems odd. And so, some people mentioned me, I mean, the first season was just like this too. It's like that. I mean, that's true. This is true to the nature of it. Kind of, there are these one-off standalone episodes, and some people haven't been a fan of that from the beginning. The difference is you get to the end of episode 1 of season 1, and they introduce Baby Yoda. He shoots IG, and it sets something up. Like you there's intrigue there. Like, you go, oh, that's what this show is, and you immediately had this thought about what it was. He's suddenly going to take care of this baby, even though he's not. We don't really know why. We don't know what this Baby Yoda is. Where with this season, you were 2 episodes in. I mean, you're really 2.5 episodes in. It was towards the back half of this episode before we really got anything that indicated, oh, okay, she's tracking him down, he's tracking him down, and then at the end of it, we know where we're going to meet our Jedi person. That's just, there is a meta story going on that you want to have some progress on, and it's a little bit weird to wait till the end of the 3rd episode to do that.
Yep. And I mean, I'm not going to like make defenses for the episode or the 2nd episode, because it, of course, it has those and evokes those sense of like family being a motif and being a theme, him having to actually grow and adopt into having that stake, right, with Baby Yoda and taking care of him, but not really into something that like progresses the character. It just kind of repeats and reestablishes something we already, like you said, that we already know, that's already been established in the 1st season. So I liked it, but just from like a entertainment level, not really from a consequential or like, I mean, this is for the 2nd episode. For the 3rd episode, like, there was a lot more depth, and I mean, we get to revisit, Moff Gideon being involved and just the Empire. So it felt like, we were revisiting and picking back up from the 1st season. So that was actually nice.
Right.
I actually like too how I feel like, I mean, I hope she's going to come back for some more episodes, but like how Bo-Katan is also looking for the Darksaber, which of course, as of now, Mando knows nothing about. Us as fans, obviously, we know all the history with the Darksaber and where it's been and everything. I really feel like it's going to end up playing a pretty important role for, at least I would say, this season, probably going forward for quite a good while.
Well, I think that's some of the fun of the way that this was set up, is that as the audience, we have more knowledge than all of these characters. And so as they're having these interactions, we saw the Darksaber, Mando didn't. We saw him survive, Mando didn't. And so then as she's saying, I'm looking for this weapon, we immediately know what's going on here. We are able to put this together before all the characters. So that's just a little bit of fun. But just even the threads that are possible with what was said in these few lines of dialogue about her quest, what she's trying to do, you can just see them setting up season 3, season 4, and what this could be later on. That gets very interesting while not, while feeling totally true to the episode. It didn't feel like out of the blue. She was like, by the way, I'm planning in 6 months that it didn't feel out of place. It entirely felt like that's what she would say in this moment, but it also plants seeds for future storylines, as well as, potential for episode 8 of this season, suddenly a re-team as they go for this Darksaber, and you have Cobb, angry old Boba Fett, Rex, Ahsoka, all battling to get the saber back. That's my plan for episode 8.
I'd definitely be all for that one. I mean, like I said, man, that Darksaber's got such a long history. I mean, all the hands it's been into, and even last time we see it is at the end of Rebels. I believe it's with Sabine, if I remember right.
Yeah. I mean, it's Boca. She gives it to Bo.
Okay, that's who it is.
And so she's like, "This is the person I would trust it with is you." And so she walks out, and she holds it up in the air and lights it. I say that as if I'm an expert. I literally just watched that episode yesterday. It was like I followed up watching Mandalorian by watching that.
I mean, I hope it ties though with Rebels, because I mean they're doing a really good job already, adding more Clone War stuff. You know, obviously, like we said, you know, Bo-Katan, the Darksaber, and we're going to be getting Ahsoka and Rex at some point. I mean,
yeah, and I think they're going to pursue that direction, like you're alluding to. I mean, they're literally taking a lot more risk with this show. You know, it's the kind of risks where the shows like Rebels and Clone Wars always felt a little bit like ugly stepchildren to me, where they were part of the Star Wars canon. Like, you know, fans loved them, but they were never really strongly alluded to, referenced, or incorporated into the movies, so I mean, I think the Mandalorian's clearly pushing for tying that all together.
And that's what I said in my review, is that we know Clone Wars, Rebels, that's canon. It is,
yes,
but it also always kind of felt like little kid canon, where it's like, hey, look, if in Rogue One, if you look in this scene that has all these ships, you can see the Rebel ship, right? Like it's very subtle stuff. They're not mentioning characters. Saw Gerrera showing up was like this, an exception where they did something that was more explicit, and then you get to Mandalorian, and they're doing much more of, all right, like, we're going to pull this guy out of the Aftermath novels, and we're going to like basically give him his own episode where we're actually going to film stuff that was in the book except from his perspective. We got Starbuck playing this character, or voicing this character on it. Let's bring her in and actually cast her in it. And so it's just taking all these things, and it doesn't make it more canon, but it does feel a lot more like they're taking it seriously. And especially with right now where the Star Wars fan base is, Mandalorian is the thing that actually is kind of unifying. And so the thing that unifies, they're also like, all right, Clone Wars, look, Rebels, we're actually bringing all this stuff in. And it does feel like they're taking it a lot more seriously because of that.
Well, even too, like Mr. Tony Stark here is telling us these Marvel guys know what they are doing. Because, yeah, obviously, you know, as we all know by now, Jon Favreau, he is the creator of the show. And, I mean, he's the one who introduced us to Iron Man, kind of essentially is the building block to the MCU that we know and love right now. I mean.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that, like, literally when you say Jon Favreau is a risk taker, he is. We wouldn't not only have the MCU without Jon Favreau, but I mean, Disney didn't want it to happen. Marvel didn't want it to happen. They thought it was going to fail. So the fact that they are doing something like The Mandalorian, they're treating it like an episodic Western, you know, and the budget is there, is very indicative that they want it to succeed, or that they're like, okay, this guy's got a track record, go for it. Or, I mean, that's from my perspective, is that it is still a huge risk, especially in the fallout of the, you know, the Skywalker trilogy, in my opinion. So.
Yeah, and I mean, just like Sean just told everybody, I mean, this does seem to be the thing that a large portion of like the fan base can agree on, that it does something that, kind of like you said, Andy. I mean, the Skywalker trilogy, or I guess the Abrams trilogy, however.
I didn't really know what to call that one. Yeah,
how that does so many different things that so many people don't like. I mean, especially The Last Jedi and obviously The Rise of Skywalker. I mean, everybody's got their critiques, at least for those two films. I know some people have problems with The Force Awakens. I mean, a lot of people like to say it's the retreading of A New Hope and stuff like that. But I look at it just like with, you know, the first episode of this season, you know, it's bringing us back into this world that we're so used to and that we haven't been in for, at this point now, a year, whether timeline wise it's been a year or what the deal is. But I like the familiarity just to bring us back, essentially.
Absolutely.
So what do you guys actually think with Baby Yoda meeting Ahsoka? Do you actually think she's going to have, because obviously at the end of Rebels, she's, I don't know how you want to word it, higher knowing, I guess you could say.
Yeah, she's in higher standing, higher. Yeah, like I get what you mean. I mean, at least the fact that they're actually referencing Jedi's more or pointing more in that direction, I think, is getting us there. So Baby Yoda either meeting Ahsoka, or I don't know, it might be kind of like with Boba Fett in the first, in the first episode where it's alluded to, or it's like made clear that either A, they're going to circle back around to it, or B, it's a misconnection. I don't know. Is the fact that they're pointing that direction is, at least for now, a little bit bigger for me than actually him meeting or it. I don't know if they confirm gender. Either way, like, is bigger for me because, there's going to be a season 3. I've got no reason to believe there's not going to be. So they could be playing that out in the long con.
Yes, I'm not expecting full-blown, oh, look, and this is Frank. I'm not expecting that. They're not going to, she's not going to know exactly who this is, but she's going to immediately recognize that this is a Baby Yoda the way the audience does. Whereas everyone else is like, oh, what a cute little creature. She will have our read of immediately like, whoa, well, this is a big deal. And so when he shows up, hey, I've got a Baby Yoda, and for the last 10 episodes or 11 episodes of my TV show, Imperials have been chasing me trying to get this Baby Yoda. She will interpret all of that the way that we do. Whereas every other character has interpreted through a different grid than we have. So I think she, in that regard, will have some sort of much more interesting take on it than everyone else. There will be some sort of inherent insight that she will have. Even just the way that she responds to seeing someone from Yoda's species, and when she's like, this is a Force user, she immediately will have a very different response from all these people like, oh, those sorcerers. She's not going to say like the Carl Weathers and be like, oh, the magic hand thing. Like, she's not going to say that. She knows Yoda. Like, she's like, so this is like, no matter what it is, it will fill in some gaps. And there is some potential that you have an episode that answers way more episodes than anything up to this point in time in regards to the identity. Obviously, we're in the show where she was introduced is called Clone Wars.
Yep.
So the potential that she has information about what could be a clone, like there's a lot of different stuff on there, what could be going on, and if they want to go like deep cut conspiracy theory ties to the movies, and this is before he came up with the plan that turned into the prequels, Palpatine had an alternative plan to take down the Jedi involving cloning them or something. Who knows?
And that was one of my theories first, right? Or like one of my conspiracies tinfoil hat on is that this is probably a clone, right? Baby Yoda. Right. I mean, so, but especially like with your idea of predating things, I mean, the thing is 50 years old, half a century, so there's clearly a timeline of things we don't really know about this thing's history. I don't know. I want to see that play out, and I want to see maybe us learn more about Yoda's actual species or species, race, whatever you want to call it. I'm really hoping we get more out of that series, out of this series too.
Yeah, and it's interesting because it's one of those ones where it's tough because the inherent nature of the show is that it doesn't overstate things. It goes for simple. It keeps it on a level where it's very experiential, and it's not going into big complex conspiracy theories. And so I think that's where it gets a little bit tricky of when they start to reveal things, does it still feel like it fits in the show? Or is it a nice release of if you have this show that is very kind of restrained on how much it releases on information, and you have an episode that very quickly gives you a lot of information that turns everything on its head really quickly.
That's something I've definitely enjoyed a lot about this show is like everything, at least with this season so far, everything that we've all like, well, at least me, what I've thought and theorized hasn't even happened at all. Like the ice planet from the last episode, I was very convinced that was the planet of Ilum, which eventually becomes Starkiller Base, blah, blah, blah. Everybody knows that history. And I guess turns out that's actually the ice planet from the very first episode that we were on. I did not know that, which I thought was really interesting, seeing a different side of that world. But, and even too, you know, Bo-Katan, like, I didn't know when she was going to be showing up. I didn't think she was going to be at least 3 episodes in. Same thing with Boba. I didn't expect Boba to maybe show up till the very last episode. And then as soon as I saw us on Tatooine, I'm like, oh, okay, so we're going to be getting Boba. And we got 30 seconds of him just staring.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, don't get me wrong. I said it on my first episode. I mean, I was still excited to see Tamora Morrison back. Technically, actually, his debut in live action as Boba, because all he's really done has been the voices for like video games and everything else like that. So something a lot of people like to kind of overlook. So we're more used to him being, you know, Jango Fett and eventually being all the clones and everything. And I even said too, I'm still really convinced that we're going to be getting more shows just based off of this. This is that building block because.
Well, I mean, we still have the Kenobi show in talks, right? I mean, wherever that lies in the mix, you know, with Ewan McGregor and everything. I mean, so
that I believe is shooting next March, if I remember right.
Yeah.
Right. So,
well, and if you can, Disney's a little bit predictable. It's not like they keep their cards hidden particularly well. You have a pretty good idea what they're looking to do at any given point in time, and you can just look over at what they're doing with Marvel shows. Yep. And they're like, hey, we're going to do these 4. Just kidding. Here's 4 more a month later. And we got these 2 that we're working on. And then here's 17. I mean, they are looking to run with these deals. So,
and I mean, to that extent, like I've kind of got mixed feelings about that because it's more like with the MCU franchise, you know, with the MCU, they're willing to do that, right? They're willing to just throw stuff to the wall, you know, anything. And it's been good. But with Star Wars, they felt, especially like the standalone movies, they felt so toes in the water. I mean, we've had movies announced over and over, and then we've had like, you know, certain like shows alluded to, and then they've like backpedaled, especially with the Solo movie, that kind of. So I feel like if they're going to do more series, it's going to kind of ride on how the Kenobi series does, right? Because the Mandalorian's doing great. So did Rogue One, right? And then Solo came out. And then they stop things.
I mean, and I don't want to get too much into the angry fanboy side of things, but there does seem to be the stuff that's Kathleen Kennedy driven is very unreliable.
Yeah.
And then the stuff that's Favreau Filoni side of things is pretty consistent. And that's so then, I'm not full blown Fandom menace or anything like that, but I mean, there's a lot of good points in there. There's like when you can so easily just contrast Kevin Feige and Kathleen Kennedy, Marvel versus Lucasfilm, and how they've handled recruiting and keeping talent.
Yes,
she's just not in the same. She's You can look at her track record of the last 40 years. She's a legendary film producer. You look at her track record with Lucasfilm, recruiting and keeping talent. It's bad. It is a bad track record. And like you know how crazy it is. Lifelong Star Wars fan. They've been announcing these Marvel movies over the last 2 years, and I haven't gotten excited about a single one of them because I don't believe they're going to happen. They're like, Ed, Taika Waititi's, he's going to do a Star Wars movie. He directed an episode and people dug it. He's going to do a movie. And I'm like, that should be like this. Wow. Like, I don't believe it. I don't believe it's going to happen. But contrast that with the TV side of things, that when Filoni, Favreau, they seem to like actually get things done.
Yes.
And they don't claim things that aren't happening. And they're the talent that gets it done, as opposed to Kathleen Kennedy, producer person. Hey, look, you guys directed the Lego movie. That's like really cool. People love you guys. You guys have a lot of energy. What if you guys did Solo? Bring your crazy wild energy into it. Well, guys, this is too energetic, too weird. Let's get Ron Howard. He directed Willow for George Lucas 30 years ago. He's super safe. I mean, it's just, what? I mean,
And actually, that's a great way you put it right there, right? Is safe, stable. Is you go back to a lot of the arguments in the, with the new trilogy, the new Star Wars trilogy, and people kind of want the familiar, but they want people to, they want the series to deviate away, but they also don't want it to. So it almost feels like fans don't know what they want. So you either have to play it safe, but like commit to that, or you have to go so balls to the wall, like actually shoot for something different, like the Mandalorian, and like commit to it. That it makes people realize, oh yeah, this is what we wanted, this is what we needed.
And what's even like risky and what's new and what's different about the Mandalorian is basically how much of a throwback it is in many regards. You go back to what were so many influences of A New Hope, and Lucas was watching Westerns. He was watching Akira Kurosawa that influenced so many of the Westerns of the 50s and 60s. And like pretty straightforward classic stories. And then you get to the Mandalorian. Everybody calls it a Western in the Star Wars universe. That's clearly what it's going for. You can clearly see a bunch of these episodes as Western templates. There's one even called the Gunslinger. I mean, it's like this is overt what they're doing. And then it's very much an older style of television, which is what's making frustrating a lot of people because they're so used to an 8-episode season is an 8-episode movie. Yep. That's what they're used to. Is it feels there's no division. Like sometimes people ask me like, "Hey man, could you rank the episodes of Stranger Things?" Like, no, because I don't even think about the show in episodes. Like I binge it, and like I don't know which episode is which. Like I know this is the beginning and this is the end, and then there's that weird one in season 2 that was a standalone deal. Beyond that, it's one long movie. It's an 8-hour movie. And The Mandalorian isn't that. It's not trying to be that. It is older storytelling. It's a bunch of older things. And that's what makes it new. That's what makes it fresh. That's what makes it different.
And I mean, to that point, it is about when we talk about that playing it safe or evoking those older ideas and themes, it's like themes, motifs, genres, those are things you want to go to. Like I missed a lot of the Western and samurai influence in the new trilogy. I really wish they'd kind of gone back to that. I mean, we didn't even really get a lot of that in the prequels, and that's what kind of killed it for me. But this feeling more like Firefly, right, Firefly exactly. Or Cowboy Bebop, or like you said, an Akira Kurosawa film. I freaking love it because it's episodic, but you can still tell there's character development, there's growth. He's doing, Man Without a Name, having to turn his back on towns, leave them to their, I know, but having to realize he's also got no home or has to be on the run. It's, it feels like I'm watching a fresh take. I mean, obviously what it is. Like I'm watching a fresh take on, sorry, the weird one in season 2, Stranger Things. I know what you're talking about, but
11 side quests to the city.
That was such a strange episode. No pun intended there. Man, just okay.
But
it's got some tension, momentum, and they're like, "Hey, what if she made some new friends in the city?" And then she's like, got her hair slicked back. What are we doing?
Oh yeah, it was that. That's one of those things that it was just complete. Especially when you talk about like ranking episodes and everything, it's like because now you have to just rank. You rank the rest of Stranger Things season 2 in place 1, and then that's like in place 2, and that's your episode ranking. Because everything else is interconnected, has a nice flow to it. But yeah, Mandalorian feels like 8 interconnected movies, or like 8 interconnected movies. But I also like that episode 3 or chapter 3 was or I guess 11 was 35 minutes. I like that they're not trying to push it to meet a certain bar like 60 minutes or anything like that. They told a concise, condensed story, drove the series forward in like little over half an hour. That's really freaking impressive to me.
I mean, I'll on that one specific point, I think that's what one thing that has frustrated me on some of this is that clearly they don't have a time constraint. And so they can go as long or short as the episode demands. And sometimes that, like this chapter 11 felt rushed, but there's no reason to rush it.
Huh. Okay.
Because you have him crashing, you have kind of him establishing pirates, and then we introduce these old characters, and then we go on a side mission, and it just all kind of moves very quickly from beat to beat. And there's a lot of room in this episode to pause and breathe. There could have been, and it just even you look at Chapter 9, and one of the things it did that was fun is that you have these flashbacks of Cobb in events from the Aftermath novels.
Mm-hmm.
And you actually see it live action from a different set of eyes. And like you could have even done so much of that with Bo, where like of this rich history of things that happened and questions that we have of how did we get to this point in time from where she was at before holding up Darksaber to where she is now to the events that we saw before. And instead it's like, a single line of dialogue that's, oh, you're just one of these people. Well, I'm this, I'm that. And so, and also like in my comment section, the overwhelming response from people was very positive. A lot of people saying maybe the best episode yet. Anyone that was a Clone Wars fan going bananas. But there was 5-10% of comments saying, I didn't watch Rebels. I didn't watch Clone Wars. These were boring characters. I didn't care about any of this. This is one of the worst episodes. I had those. And there was no one that was like, yeah, this is my 5th favorite episode of the series. No, it was like, that was amazing. Or I didn't know who these people were. I didn't care. And that's where you kind of go, oh, was this an episode that was written entirely for people that would get excited to see a character they already know and an actress they already know? In which case, they probably needed to do a little bit more work to win over the new people that haven't watched it. Because, I mean, to a generation, oh, everybody knows Clone Wars. Everyone knows Bo-Katan. Of course you know this. If you're my age, most people my age didn't watch Clone Wars. Clone Wars came out when you were 28 years old. You grew up watching stories. You love Star Wars. But you didn't check out a show about Clone Wars because you didn't like the prequels. And it wasn't targeting.
Mm-hmm. And I'll be straight up. Like, I haven't seen Rebels or Clone Wars. And that
How dare you? How dare you? You're only 5 years too old to be the target age range.
I haven't had cable since, like, 2009. So, like,
actually, even to pause on that point, even those, like my sister's kids, they are the exact target audience. They loved Clone Wars. Yes. They just didn't have Disney XD, and so then they didn't see Rebels, and they were like concerned about what happened to Captain Rex. And so I'd seen Rebels, and so I like good news. He didn't kill Jedi. I don't want to spoil too much, but he didn't go evil. He didn't go full Anakin or anything like that. And so I'm sorry, I cut you off. But like even people that are target age range haven't seen Rebels because it was on a cable channel, and a lot of people don't have cable. I mean, I've never had cable.
And that's like what is great about the the digital era, the streaming revolution, whatever you want to call it. But also that is part of the problem, is like when I was seeing stuff like Rebels, I like stuff like anime. I grew up with anime. I love Western and Eastern animation. So you would think that that's something that I would have immediately gone for, but it felt like it was geared towards children so much. Like the marketing was so in that specific, demographic that I couldn't, if I watched it, it wouldn't be kind of worth my time. And that stinks, but I guess it also wasn't conveyed well to me that was all going to be canon, that it was all going to be like, it wasn't just going to be fun side quests, but it was actually going to all be interconnected and play into the grander Star Wars universe. But I also didn't have cable, so
yeah. Well, and it wasn't quite as clearly stated until the Disney era, where they like, all right, we're cutting all of this off, but so therefore we have to say what is still good. There was like multiple layers of canon for years, and it got confusing because the book level of canon had multiple streams that conflicted with each other, and so there's just a lot to it that made it difficult to be like super invested. I mean, even when it came to the rules of canon in the old days, like where did the Ewok movies play into that? Where did the Ewok and droid cartoons play into, like, things that pretty clearly they weren't really running with some of that stuff.
Yeah.
And so that's where some of these shows just, it's like, okay, yeah, it's canon, wink, wink. I don't know how much it really ties in, though. And some of it felt very fantastical to me. That's like just when you have 5 seasons or 7 seasons of adventures between Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith. That's a lot of adventures that inherently to me just kind of feels like, does it feel like all of this really happened? Like, I don't know that every week is this as exciting, even in the world of Star Wars. So that's always some of that stuff always kind of held me back a little bit from fully embracing some of it. So when you tie it in with the shows and those key elements, it does give it, I think, a little bit more strength and legitimacy. Anyway, that was a long rabbit trail. I didn't even know what was going on.
Oh, and I guess Crazy Bryson, I see you. Where it says Rebels is on Disney Plus, which is thank you. But yeah, Rebels is on Disney Plus, and that's true. I need to catch up, and make that happen. But it's one of those where it's also like after I've started The Mandalorian, so I am going to appreciate it. Like having gone back, I just wish I had been in this like era before The Mandalorian, where I ramped up into it. I mean, I still like the characters. I still like Bo-Katan, and I still appreciate the episode. But to Sean and Austin's point, some people aren't going to appreciate it as much because they don't have that back history or they don't have that level of investment.
Well, and like you and I, Andy, we keep talking about all the time. Sean, I guess I don't know if you've ever watched it or not, but we always talk about the Clone Wars micro series from 2003.
Oh, the Genndy Teratop. Yep. Oh man.
Yeah, I couldn't remember what his name is, but like the thing I think that one does a little bit better. I mean, it kind of really drove more characters.
Oh yeah.
So that we liked, like Grievous. Like you talk about Grievous every single time we talk about Star Wars.
Yeah, because Grievous and that was part of the problem, right? Was same thing with what I was talking about with Rebels and the new Clone Wars iteration is where I felt it was marketed poorly. Is you have Grievous in the original, that little Clone Wars miniseries, and he's a monster. He's frightening. He's quad wielding lightsabers, and then he's kind of like broken in in the prequel movies. So,
yeah, he's like killing Jedi left and right in that episode, and then then you get to this new show, and he's just constantly running from everybody. Like even a character like Asajj Ventress,
Yep.
In that show too, she is just like terrifying. She's just constantly just egging on Anakin to turn, and then they have that huge battle where Anakin actually does finally start to embrace the dark side more.
Yep.
And like I feel like that show, I think it's only like 20 episodes long. They're like 20-minute episodes, where the Clone Wars, however you want to word it, I think they call it just TCW is normally what they call it for the Clone Wars, but
fair enough. Yeah.
It's too like kiddish for me because like I got to season 3 towards the end of season 3 and I had to stop watching because I could not make it through the show.
And is that Rebels or Clone Wars?
Clone Wars.
Okay.
But like we just said, Grievous in there, he's not the Grievous that I liked. Like Grievous used to be so high on my list. I used to love Grievous. I thought he was going to end up being probably one of the best villains in Star Wars history. And
oh yeah, I mean,
Clone Wars TV show makes him look just like a coward. It's like,
and same thing with Darth Maul, right? I mean, we talk about that too, is how Darth Maul was done dirty in the Phantom Menace. But and I think that's a little bit of my fear too. Is I'm always worried about marketing with the Star Wars series. That's any movie series, right? But especially for like bigger franchises like Star Wars that I feel like don't need that level of like kind of misdirection. But I don't have that qualm or like fear with The Mandalorian, which is nice.
Yeah, that's one thing. To Sean's point too, as he went on his big ramble earlier, I think the thing that Mandalorian does better than I will willingly say anything that Disney's put out lately is
Paw Patrol, man.
Paw Patrol. You can flesh more things out. You can actually do more with these characters, even with whether you do it for 20 minutes, whether you do it for 60 minutes. I mean, there's more you can do. We can spend longer with these characters. You can make them develop a lot more throughout the course of the show, and instead of a 2.5 hour mark than what we're normally used to when watching Star Wars.
Well, and when we're used to watching Star Wars, it's also the weight of having to be a Star Wars movie. And so it has to be this big, fast-moving adventure that does all this stuff that's required of a Star Wars movie. And what's great about The Mandalorian is that we just get to spend time in the world. It's not about, let's get to the next big, gigantic action sequence. Mm-hmm. We're going to these small towns and villages. Like, what did happen down the road after the battle of Endor, when the second Death Star blew up, what happened down the road in Tatooine in a little village? What happened after Jabba got choked out? Like what happened after that? And the normal people. And some of these shows I think they're doing a really nice job of making the world feel much more lived in, not just by heroes, but by people. Even that's one of the things I actually really enjoyed about the last season of Clone Wars. I'm not a big Clone Wars person. I've watched all of it. I've watched through all of it, and then I paid much closer attention to season 7 because it obviously was last year. Yep. But they had a whole plot line about people on Coruscant being like, we don't like the Jedi. Like, they came in to save the day and they blew up my shop. Like, I don't have a business anymore because of the Jedi. And they didn't come back to help or anything. They went off to fight their next war. These guys are warmongers. And so you get the perspective through these shows of normal people. That's a thing that I think they're doing really well right now. And Mandalorian is the ultimate example of that, of, you know, even as much as I'm not a big fan of, you know, the taxi episode, what's the difficulties of living in this world? This fish lady needs to just get to another planet, has to hop on board with shady bounty hunter Mandalorian guy, and then they're trying to run away from New Republic X-Wing fighters. Like, that's the world that they're in, of like, how does this actually function? What do people think about the government? And that's all interesting to me. And then all the while, also, Imperials are still out there.
Yep.
It's a lived-in, what are the actual consequences? How would this actually play out? And we're seeing it, and it has time to breathe.
And I wish those were the kind of political elements I got from the prequel movies. Because, you know, we had, like, the Jedi Council. We had, like, all the politics and everything going on. But I feel like I just wasn't invested. You know, it was more like kind of
the discussion about the dangers of death sticks in episode 2 didn't draw you in?
I want to say it was a little forced, but
hey, want some death sticks?
But
subtle, George, subtle.
But yeah, no, it's stuff like that where, like, to your point, it's like the view of the Jedi as not being heroes is awesome, because you get all these facets. They're either like myths, they're heroes, or they're, you know, they're the potential death of the freaking universe. You know, they are, like, which I like getting to see that. And also the small stakes, you know, like with respect to, you know, the second episode of season 2, at least we get to see this fish lady and her eggs, and jokes about Baby Yoda wanting to eat the last of this lady's kind. You know, that's very holistic. But yeah, you know, we get to see that there are some stakes involved with the Mandalorian, you know, with Mando doing these odd jobs, which I like. Don't get me wrong, wasn't a grand scheme episode, but I do still like those snippets of, like, this thing that is about the money for him does have these large implications for the Star Wars universe.
So what I'd be interested to see is, in light of even the conversation we're having, is that if they'll find a way to actually make sense of what the First Order is. Like, one of the problems with the way the sequels are in the movies is that they do not at all actually explain what the First Order is, how it got so powerful, and how does this thing just
Mm-hmm.
emerge that literally converted a planet into a jumbo Death Star. Like, what? And, you know, and I've read some of the books, and they do flesh some things out. They explain some things, but that your movie shouldn't require that. And an enormous chunk of the Star Wars fan base far greater chunk will watch The Mandalorian versus read some of these novels, Bloodlines, and all of that.
I actually gotta take a break right there. You said Jumbo Death Star, and, like, I'm still confused by the fact that the Jumbo Death Star was actually, don't get me wrong, suspension of disbelief, was more technologically feasible than building an actual Death Star. You know, because you just take a pre-existing planet and strap a cannon onto it. You don't just build a moon. That's either way. That's my aside.
A planet that is close enough to a star that it can suck the energy out of the star and shoot the star's energy through many, many light years, or however far away that would be, to other star systems to blow up the planets. And you can be on one planet somewhere and actually see the beam go to the other. Science.
Space science.
Space science.
I like that.
Oh my.
You mean you don't believe in like 100 different Star Destroyers having Death Star cannons on it?
Just trying to think, like, I with Rise of Skywalker, I would just love to be like in the room when they're pitching this and to see everyone's take, and then the after conversation, like, wait, did JJ just really just say that, like, and then he lifts his hands up and 1,000 Star Destroyers just raise up from the ground and they've got Death Star raised, like did his son, his 5-year-old son, pitch this idea? Like, what?
But
At
also,
the level of like thought to that, it sounds exactly like the creativity that my kids come up with, and they're 6 and 8, and they're just, all they think of it is there more of them? Are they bigger? And what if you took this weapon and put it on this thing? There's not like a creativity to it. It's just like very basic level childlike thinking. What does JJ do? Raise his hands. Suddenly there's a fleet, and all the questions in your mind go, how did this happen?
Well,
Nobody noticed? Who's piloting all of these?
Not
What?
just that, but it's like there's a single antenna. There's a single antenna that can, you don't think that, like, okay, I'm in IT. I'm just going to say, like, redundancy. You back all your stuff up to a computer. So you're saying they didn't, like, just have like 1 billion antennas for these billion Star Destroyer. You're just going to send these things out there and hope everything works out. Like, it's just, there's suspension of disbelief. There's space magic. And then there's that.
Yeah. But yeah, it was a great movie. Great send-off. It was a worthy conclusion to the 43-year-old Skywalker saga. They absolutely delivered on it with that one, with these great ideas. Oh, JJ. From the screenwriter of Best Picture winning Argo, Chris Terrio.
Gosh.
What a confusing decade of films from him.
At least he gets to say he's directed Star Wars and Star Trek movies, so that is a pretty.
You can say that.
That is pretty impressive. Going to give him that.
Back to what Sean was saying, I definitely agree. I hope that is something they eventually do more, is actually, talk more about, okay, how did the First Order start? Like, did they just take leftover stuff from the Empire, or did they just find a couple of scraps here and there, and they're just like, hey, we can do this. Everybody else has done it once before. Let's do it again. And same thing with recycled, like, stormtroopers. Like,
right.
Yeah.
Couldn't think of anything else besides just a stormtrooper.
Yeah. I mean, I think that there's a lot of those frustrations. Like, for me, my quick take on the sequels, I just, I loved Force Awakens when I first saw it.
Yeah.
And after the frustrations of the prequels, it was nice to just kind of have something that was safe. And it's okay to do, like, 35 years later, do a little bit of a requel of sorts, whatever you want to, fancy word you want to come up for it. And it had some things I wasn't crazy about, but in general, it was just a nice breath of fresh air. And then as soon as it became clear they didn't have a plan, they didn't know where they were going, none of these things they set up were going to pay off properly. They didn't have satisfying answers. And, and they were reactionary. They didn't even like, oh man, people weren't crazy about The Last Jedi.
Mm-hmm.
And so then they just, okay, let's, and then, or even to Colin Trevorrow, whatever exactly happened with that, he makes a big, gigantic hit movie with Jurassic World, and then his follow-up flops, and then he's fired from Star Wars. Mm-hmm. And how much of that was the flop of his movie that nobody saw, so I can't even think of the name of it, because I didn't even see it. And how much of that was they didn't like a script, how much of that was the course correction, like, oh, JJ, just get in here. But it was just so reactionary with this franchise that so many people cared about, and they didn't have a plan. They couldn't stick to anything. And so you just get all of these threads that don't pay off, and they go with the goofiest answers on some of them. So a lot of it's still fun, but so frustrating. So frustrating.
I mean, that's the thing. Like you said, reactionary, knee-jerk. You explained it to me best about The Rise of Skywalker, how it feels like two movies try to be fit into one, and having to revise everything from The Last Jedi. I don't know. It's
like if you have a situation where it seemed like the best tweet I read about this, where someone described the sequel trilogy as the weirdest trilogy I've ever seen. It seems like each movie actively dislikes the previous movie. So Last Jedi takes all of these threads that seem to be set up about Snoke and all the fan theories about Rey, and he went, no, let's not do that. And whatever foundation was laid, it just goes scorched earth on it. And it kind of sets up its own little thing about there's going to be a rising of children. And then the next movie goes, let's go scorched earth on that little foundation that Rian Johnson did, and let's do this whole other thing. Like, we're going to rebuild this. Actually, it's all about Palpatine. We're going to build a new foundation in the first 10 minutes and abandon everything that was said in the previous two movies to tell a new story to try and cap this whole thing off. And you go,
well, and it also...
Did you guys not have any meetings before you started filming The Force Awakens? Like, what is this?
It also failed to capitalize on any of those, like you said, I mean, any of these awesome, if you were the one telling me about it, but what I was reading up, any of these awesome storylines it's set up for Rey, Poe, and Finn. You know, like the idea, it was kind of this handoff between the original trilogy, Han, Leia, Luke, to this, like, you know, this new triad, whatever you want to call it, or dyad, I guess, with Kylo Ren and Rey. But just like, I loved the characters in the first one. I love what they were setting up. And then there was just this departure. I loved Finn's background. That was the coolest thing ever for me. Seeing this clone trooper start to like have like a morality develop, you know, starting to like feel not like a part of a monolith and depart from that. It was sick. And then nothing.
Right. And it's like wherever that might have been going, that's where I get so confused by people that are rabid Last Jedi defenders, that what they like, how could you possibly be okay? Like, and people say, like, it's perfect, it's the best one. How could you be okay with what they did with Finn? Like, if you like the deconstruction of heroes, it's so thematically rich. Like, if you love all that, okay, but look at what they did with Finn. Like, they took Finn and they're like, and then he goes on this goofy side quest that actually is responsible for killing a bunch of people. And then he's going to sacrifice himself to save the day, and someone crashes into him and be like, don't die for what you hate, live for what you love, or whatever that her goofy line was. But she literally crashed into him. She could have killed him, and people are going to die because, like, what? Just nonsense. That's what they did with Finn. They set up this very interesting storyline and turn it into that, and then JJ does, like, even less with it. And it's even more nonsensical in The Rise of Skywalker. And you see what Colin Trevorrow was going to do with, you know, Finn being a, like, Spartacus and leading a revolution of former stormtroopers to storm Coruscant. Like, you hear that and you go, you had good ideas. You just chose to not use them. So weird. But yeah, Kathleen Kennedy's the best. I think we all agree on that.
Oh, yeah, easily, man. I do.
I changed my mind from earlier. I'm sorry, I'm cutting you off. I am full Fandom menace now. I'm on.
Oh my God!
It's happening here live, everybody.
I just don't get how it's the highest. The Last Jedi is like the highest rated one. Like, I mean, on Rotten Tomatoes, right? It's like the highest rated one out of that trilogy.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. I think Force Awakens is like 94, and I think The Last Jedi is like a 96 or something like that.
Yeah, it's so weird. Some of the, when you start to understand somewhere where critics, it's a kind of a weird experience because you see things before people and it's exciting to be the first to see it. And you watch so many things that when something's different, you kind of like, oh, that was cool. But a lot of them are still defending it. Like, yeah. I have had plenty of times where I've been like, come out and think, like, that was so cool. Oh, that was, and then, you know, the honeymoon phase ends. But we're years afterwards, and there are a number of these people that loved it. They still say it's the best Star Wars movie. It's the most thematically rich. The exploration of Luke in this movie was fantastic. This is true to who he was before. Everybody has a bad day and wants to kill their nephew who's their student. Everybody has that moment where it happens. And, like, still
Fair
defending
enough.
it. We've all been there. I mean, that's why I keep a chainsaw in my office, just in case.
Relatable.
So yeah, so relatable, and they're still defending it. That's the one to me that's kind of confusing, and they're defending almost everything about it. That's what's weird. I'm sorry, Austin. We cut you off there a few minutes ago.
You're good, man.
My bad, my bad.
I'm gonna say this. I mean, unpopular opinion. I do like the sequel trilogy. I mean, I know there's lots of things within it that, like you said, don't make sense. Or
how do I leave this feed? I'm out of here.
No, you stay and you listen. I mean, even another unpopular opinion. I've said it before. I actually like this trilogy as a whole more than I like the prequels as a trilogy, because I've enjoyed more of what happens in the sequels. I think the sequels are fun. Like, I'm in the middle when it comes to The Last Jedi. Like, when I left the theater, I was just emotionless. I didn't know how to feel. Weirdly enough, this is my fiance's favorite Star Wars film is The Last Jedi.
I'm sorry to hear that.
Is she a Rotten Tomatoes certified critic?
No, unfortunately not. No, like it's funny though the way she worded it. She's like, I like the one that everybody hates. I'm like, well, you got to be more specific, because there's like 4 or 5 that like everybody hates. It's like, oh, the one with a lot of red. Oh, that one. Yeah. This guy over here. I mean,
yeah.
That's the thing. Like, I'm totally fine with someone having a middle of the road opinion. There are a lot of things in it that are done really well. And that's what I think is frustrating, the discussion about it. You have the Fandom menace. It ruined my childhood. It's the worst. There's not one good thing about it. Rian Johnson is the dumbest director on the entire planet. He can't direct anything worth anything. And so they're even like going after Knives Out. Like, this movie sucks. No, Knives Out is actually a really fun whodunit. Like, what are you talking? Rian Johnson is very talented. I just don't like the direction that the story he came up with. I don't like. I bet if someone else had come up with the script and story, he would have done a great Star Wars movie that I would have enjoyed. And then you have the other side to it of people that this is the best one. It's the most thematically rich. Like, they can't acknowledge that there are some problems. And like the criticism that's so frustrating to me is people be like, oh, you guys complained that The Force Awakens is just exactly a rehash of A New Hope beat by beat, and then they do something different, and then you complain for it being too different. It's like, well, but it is also very similar to Empire Strikes Back. Like, you have the Resistance, the Rebels are on the run from the Empire First Order that are striking back after what happened, and they're on the run while our hero is off with a secluded Jedi training. And then the throne room sequence right out of Return of the Jedi. Yep. Sure, Rian Johnson subverted our expectations by how all of this paid off. The third act final battle is different, but the setup actually still is very similar. They were still rehashing the original trilogy with that movie. Anyway, I'm in a bit of a mood today, I guess. It's probably because I got amped up on this NOS I've been drinking while we were doing all this, talking about all this. But yeah, anyway, yeah, I did a video right after Rise of Skywalker where I did a showdown of the trilogies, and I believe I had the sequels above the prequels.
Yep.
I think I would change that now. I think I would be largely because even some of the behind the scenes stuff we've learned about. When you see what they were thinking about with Kevin Trevorrow, when you learn these quotes from the different actors about, we were thinking this is who Rey was going to be. We were changing all the way up until when we hit the record button and started filming. It just really put it on a sour note for me, the sequel trilogy, and for all the flaws of the prequels. And there are many, especially, I would say, with Attack of the Clones and the execution. There are massive problems. Yeah. There's at least a coherent vision.
Yes.
He had a plan, whether it was his ego or whatever it was that he couldn't say, do what he did with Empire and Return of the Jedi, pass it along to someone else. For whatever reason, he didn't do that. But I think if he had, they would have been. There is a central idea that is very strong, whereas there's no central idea. There's no exploration of something new with the sequels. Anyway, that's talking for a long time again.
Well, and I mean that is a point though, right? Is we already said like Rian Johnson's doing like the next trilogy, right, or whatever. Or that's what they said, like the next Star Wars trilogy. Whenever that happens, I mean, was it?
I mean, that was a thing that was announced,
Right,
but there
okay.
hasn't been an update in 2 years.
Yep.
Yeah,
And so
it's
it
been
feels a
pretty
little
silent.
bit like they're trying to like wait for people to forget and then go, we canceled that one too. Because the Game of Thrones guys were going to do something, and then Game of Thrones season 8 came out, and they're like, hey, they actually have a deal with Netflix, actually, so it's not going to work out.
And I guess that's what I mean is in line with that like common theme is if they just let the Abrams trilogy play out with that consistent tone, it still would have been better overall, even if it was average. And then you let Rian Johnson do his trilogy. And even if it were average, once again, coherent vision, at least it's got unified tones and themes, and you can like take it apart later, digest it, and like we'll probably come to love it more like people do with the prequels. You know.
Even like you said
And I
before,
love
Andy, on a previous episode we did. I mean, there's a reason why George Lucas did the first 6 films, and then he got so much criticism. That's why he's like, "Yeah, here, Disney, you take a try." And then they hate it even more, and they're like, "George, why don't you buy back Lucasfilm and make better movies?" He's just like, "No, you keep that."
Yeah, it's what's interesting, George Lucas, that what's happened to him since Return of the Jedi. It's actually kind of tragic in its own way of the thing that brought him $4 billion.
Yeah.
An incredible amount of love, but in other ways it ruined his career as an actual filmmaker.
Mm-hmm.
Because what has he done since Return of the Jedi? There's a couple little things he's produced here. There's like Radio Days or something like that. Red Tails came up with a story for Willow, and then
You love Willow.
20 years he's just done sequels that were poorly received. And even though like you stop and think about, he's a filmmaker. He's this creative, brilliant mind that in a very short window of time came up with Star Wars and Indiana Jones.
Yep.
Like that's who this guy is. And then at some point, like he gets burned out, goes through divorces in the mid 80s, wants to take a break. I gotcha. But you get to the year 1990, he's worth billions of dollars. He can self-fund whatever he wants.
Yeah.
Whatever idea he wants, whatever he does. And it turns into, hey, let's do the prequels. He does the prequels, and with the reaction to him, followed by the reaction to Crystal Skulls. He spent like the last years of his life like we know how much he was paid for Star Wars. That is in his checking account.
Mm-hmm.
Like he wants to write a check to fund a $1 billion film.
Mm-hmm.
He has that in, and then he'd only have $3 billion left. Actually, I think he gave $1 billion to a school system, so he's only got $2 billion left to live off of for the last however many years he has left, because he's in his late 70s now. He could do that, but he was so fried by the fans.
Yeah.
That since I'm a lot like George Lucas, I'm a creator myself on YouTube. I have faced, but like legitimately, like you put out a Star Wars video, and the comments are just nasty. They are vicious, and they're like it is a passionate fan base that eats its own, including eating the creator of Star Wars. And so he stopped making movies. That's on us.
Austin, I do think we talked. I feel like you, me, and Ren touched on that, right? Is like kind of the toxicity of fan bases like Star Wars. Is you've got this beauty of getting like extended universe, extended canon, and then you also have people like Disney who throw that out and kind of also disregard the beautiful parts of the fandom, as well as the creative freedom that people were to take to run with it that people like had established as canon. Then it all gets thrown out, and I feel like all that does is spur more toxicity,
Yep.
So it's such a conflicting and confusing narrative in the Star Wars universe. It just goes back and forth. And then I get that it's big, but the bigger the fan base, the more chance you have for toxicity, right?
Even here, as Connor literally says, and literally this is exactly what Ren said, no one hates Star Wars more than Star Wars fans. Like, dude,
that's what it was. Yep.
Well, it's weird too, because like that's why I never understood this whole fandom menace crap ever. But like, there's just such a vast world of Star Wars you can love. If you don't like the sequels, okay, well you got the original trilogy, and if you like them, the prequels. I mean, depending on what your take is. I mean, I look at it this way. No matter what, I respect everybody's opinions. I mean, like you guys, it's very obvious, you're not huge fans of the sequels, and I really like them, but everyone's entitled to their opinions. I mean, if you say the original trilogy is the worst, then we can't be friends anymore, unfortunately.
Bro.
Yeah, right. But like, that's the thing. Like, there's so much this world has. Like, it's just a constant building world. And again, there's the whole expanded universe. I have friends that's all they care about, But I always look at it as, regardless, all the Star Wars fans, we all have the original trilogy. Like, that's always going to be, I keep constantly saying it, but the building block of this huge world that we're all just love certain things about, whether it's characters, planets, movies, books, comics, whatever. I mean,
yep. And that is actually another thing you and I and Ren have talked about, is how well the comics have been received. I mean, if there's one thing that Disney buying Marvel has been great, because you have the Dark Horse comics, and even those did pretty well. But then you get Disney and Marvel become a powerhouse, and I mean Lucasfilm. Marvel gets the creative realm with the Star Wars franchise, and you've had knockout comics coming out. Like I've talked about Vader Down by Kieran Gillen, who is one of my favorite Young Avengers, right? He wrote my favorite Young Avengers run. I mean, as well as The Wicked and the Divine. Like, he's done a lot of good series, and you get like this kind of creative talent in Star Wars comics, and you also establish it as canon. You get to flesh out characters like Darth Maul and Vader, and I mean, it's just, and even Poe, and even Rey, and even Finn. But I mean, like, so the comics have been received well, which I like, but at the same time, when you're counting more on your ancillary and your auxiliary media to kind of cover, cover for you in terms of like what the movies are doing, then you've done, you've not delivered well for your fan base.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it seems like one thing that's been received well, like we said, obviously Mandalorian. Like, everybody has thoroughly enjoyed Mandalorian as a whole. I mean, yeah, there might be some weaker episodes here and there, but even, I know some people also have problems with it, but even like Rogue One, like, Andy, it's your favorite Star Wars film out of them all. I mean, yeah, that's what I said. I thought that was interesting too. I'm like, okay.
Well, I also like, like if we're like to tie it in a weird way to like the Halo video games, one of my favorites is Halo Reach. I like the idea that the ending, but you have to get there. It's kind of like why I do appreciate the prequel trilogy, is because Anakin becomes Darth Vader, but seeing the steps that get him there, even if it was a little messy, right? But seeing the steps that get him there is nice, because I don't know every footstep. I just know, the destination. So that's always fun for me. And Rogue One was nice because you're seeing all this fatality, you're seeing all this sacrifice, you're seeing this just end run, right, to lead to a better future for the galaxy. So, that's what I like. Where, once again, where it's going, but seeing how you get there with these unsung heroes is awesome.
Mm-hmm.
So that means you're excited about the Cassian Andor series for Disney Plus they're working on?
Oh, bro.
That's the stuff that I don't get with their, like, they say they're doing Obi-Wan, and you go, oh, that makes a lot of sense. This is a beloved character, and there's a 20-year gap of time. By now, 15 years since Ewan played the character, so he's aged a little bit. So, like, you can, even, like, there's a cool potential built into that.
Yes.
What was this guy doing during that window of time? You immediately think, that's, okay, cool, that's interesting. And then you think all the other things you could do with the Star Wars universe. Remember that random guy in Rogue One? What was his name again? Let's give him a show. What? I don't understand.
Well, and some of that I also wish they just drop it. Like, at this point, you guys talk so much about what series, not you, Disney. Disney talks so much about series that are coming out, Star Wars, and then just, nixes it or whatever. At this point, just drop it. People are going to watch it. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's risky, but stuff like Mandalorian works. Just go ahead and release it. We know that you have 2 knockout series in terms of Mandalorian and hopefully Kenobi if it drops. So just go ahead and give us whatever else, and don't talk it up like it's going to happen. I don't know.
Well, like I will say it, Cassian Andor, he's my least favorite character in that movie, but kind of like alongside with Ren, day one, it's Star Wars. I will still be there. I will still watch it. They can make a film about Jabba the Hutt, and I would go see it, or a TV show. I mean, I
think we all want to see that Jabba the Hutt series.
Oh man, that'd be great. Well, heck, Sean, you and I, we still got to work on our solo series that we were talking about before.
It's true. That's another one that you go, what was Han doing for those 10 years as a scoundrel?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You immediately, you go, oh, it's like Firefly, except it's a little bit faster paced. It's maybe a little bit more overtly fun than the Mandalorian, but which also had Firefly comparisons.
Yep.
But you do, like, you hear that and you go, oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense. They even laid the groundwork with the Darth Maul and Crimson Dawn or whatever it is. It's all like there. Makes sense. Or Cassian Andor.
Yeah, it's such just like weirdly a downgrade from that.
Yeah.
Like, it's like, what? Why? I mean, I've said it before. Solo should have been a series. I mean, I think you could have done a lot more, but I don't want an actual sequel to Solo. I want this underworld trilogy, like I keep bringing up. Like, do one with crime lords and then do the last one with bounty hunters. I mean,
yeah, and I mean, because I think there was supposed to be like a Fett movie, right? Like a Boba Fett or a Jango Fett movie. I mean,
Josh Trank of Fantastic Four was doing Boba Fett, and then it turns out he's crazy.
You mean F4 Castic or
Fanforstic, as they say.
There we go.
Ooh, that one.
Gosh.
Yeah, it was going to be a Boba Fett movie. And it's interesting. I wonder if that was a Boba Fett that was. Anyway, I know what that was. Like, how far of a pitch did they have? What was it?
Mm-hmm. I mean, even with Boba, I mean, like, there's talks now that they're already in the midst of filming this like micro series now, apparently based off of him being in this episode of The Mandalorian.
Yeah.
Yeah, but how, like,
sounds suspicious to me.
Yeah, exactly.
That sounds like a we got this covered thing.
Like, yeah, it's almost even weirdly, it's like too ironic as well. Like, oh yeah, here's 30 seconds of Boba. Now here's a 4-part miniseries for you guys. Like,
he's a character that I don't like. I think you could, if you bring him in as a side character and you give him a little bit here in The Mandalorian, that's kind of cool and interesting. But the idea of a Boba Fett movie almost takes all the fun out of it. Like, the mystery is what makes him interesting. Like, who is this guy that everyone's afraid of that captured Han Solo? Who is this guy? And then it's like, oh, here he is, like a day in the life. The mystery. Like, that's one of the things I really don't like about the prequels is tying Boba Fett into that. And it's like that sort of thing is when you just start feeling very fan fiction-y to me, when it's like, oh, remember this guy? Actually, his dad isn't his dad. It's a clone. He's a clone, and the clone is one of the clones. Like, when you start doing that stuff, that's what fan fiction stuff does, where everyone's related to someone else. And so I wish they
get more of the Rise of Skywalker effect.
Yep. I was going to say, some of the Rise of Skywalker felt fan fiction-y, especially with the Rey and Ren romance just felt fan fiction-y to me. You know, I get it. Actually, I don't.
Well, I mean, as they like to say, anything is possible. So, guys, I guess kind of to close out this episode of Talkalorian. So, out of 10, what would you guys give this episode? Andy?
Oh, boy. Dang it. I'm going to go ahead and go with a... Gosh, dang it, man. I'm going to go ahead and go with an 8. I still like the first episode more because I really like the Western vibe, and I liked how it just started off the series. The second one, you know, I wasn't here last week. I would give the second one like a 7. Actually, maybe a 6.5, honestly. And then this one I'd give an 8. I liked it. I liked that it got us in the right direction. I liked how condensed it was, but I also wish it were a little bit longer, like you said, to tie it in more for the people who hadn't seen Rebels or Clone Wars. So 8.
Okay. Sean, how about you?
I mean, I think I'd go with like an 8 too. Yeah, solid action, move the story along. Some nice fan service, but I think it needed 10 more minutes.
Yeah,
And
I think
Austin?
that's one of the things that definitely holds it back more for me. I'd probably give it like a 7. I mean,
Oh,
again, unfortunately for me, like I didn't see the other stuff with Bo-Katan when it comes to like the middle part of Clone Wars where we're on Mandalore a little bit more and Maul starts to take over. Like I know about it, I've just unfortunately never seen it, but yeah, there's some decent action. There's like you said, some fan service, but fortunately it was just a little bit faster paced than the previous episode. And I think that last one I only gave like a 5 or a 5.5. I think it was something like that. So that's my take on the episode. So
very nice.
but all right, guys, that is going to do it for this episode of the Talkalorian. I want to thank Andy for coming back, and I also want to thank Sean Chandler for being our special guest today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Always fun to talk Star Wars, and when you get any two fans of Star Wars together, you're going to have 3 opinions. So, it's nice to have the back and forth and all of it, and yeah, it's fun.
Rock and roll.
All right. And Sean, is there anything you'd like to plug before we sign off?
Yeah, you could just find me on the YouTube. You look up Sean Chandler, you'll either find NFL player and discover that I've recently been transferred to the Panthers, or you'll find a guy that looks like me and is talking about movies. I was not transferred to the Panthers recently. I am the guy talking about movies.
All righty. And Andy, how about you?
Just King's Comics. New episodes coming soon, slowly but surely. But guys, thanks for tuning in.
All right, guys. With that being said, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and we'll see you in the next one.